Oh my goodness. Good morning, all. So great to see you again. And we are here with our first speaker of the day. And I am going to say her name slowly so I don't mess up her name because I honor names. So we have with us Carol Van Den Hende. Carol, is that correct? Awesome.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much, Carol, for making the time to be here with us. So Carol is an award-winning author who pens stories of resilience and hope. Oh my God, I love that. Her novel, Goodbye, Orchid, won the 2020 American Fiction Award winner for urban fiction, Pinnacle Achievement Award winner for multicultural fiction, IAN Outstanding Fiction for Best First Novel, 2 Royal Dragonfly Awards, 2 Best Book Finalists Awards, Audiobook Reviewer New Author of the Year Award, 2021 Gold American Advertising Award. Oh, you guys need to stay because I need to read all of Carol's accomplishments. 2020 Book Excellence Award, 2021 Author Shout Recommended Read Award, 2021 Cops Featherling International Award, Multicultural Fiction Gold, Chanticleer International Chantelane, First Place Award, 2021 National Indie Excellence Award, a Zibby Award nomination, and was named the top book of 2020 by the Right Review. Plus, it's been featured by Glamour, BuzzFeed, Parade, Travel and Leisure, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, WABC, radio, among others. Wow. Carol, I don't even think that I should be sitting here with you. Oh my goodness, that is so fantastic. So Carol is a speaker, strategist, board member, and climate reality leader. One secret to her good fortune, her humorous husband, and teenage twins who prove that love really does conquer all. Oh my God, I love it so much. Oh my goodness, Carol, wow. Welcome.
Thank you so kindly for that, Michelle. I really appreciate the warm welcome, and also to Jen for putting on this amazing conference, and to everyone here who's tuned in, who's listening, who's ready to learn. And I'm just completely honored to be here with you and to be able to share some of my experiences. And so you got to hear a little bit from Michelle's introduction about my life as an author. And she mentioned that I'm also a marketer and a strategist. In fact, that's been my career. So for decades now, I've been a marketer, strategist, insights professional, and I'm currently a digital leader for Mars Incorporated. I've worked on amazing brands like M&M's, Twix. I launched Twix peanut butter, Three Musketeers, Milky Way, Dove chocolate in the US and in China. And it's from all of those decades of experience that I really come to this place of helping to share my knowledge and to teach authors. I think I was called to this. My very first writers' meeting I ever attended, I stood up, I introduced myself as a marketer at Mars. I heard this gasp arise within the whole audience. And I thought to myself that this audience loved chocolate. And although I found that that actually was true as well, what was even more true was that they really wanted to tap into my marketing expertise. Because we as writers, we come to the written word because we love literature, we love storytelling, and we want to honor that. But we don't realize sometimes until we get into the industry that we also have to be business people, that we have to be marketers. And therefore, we don't always have the tools to be able to do that effectively. And so it's been completely my privilege to be able to speak at many writers' conferences like Writers Digest, like Rutgers Writers Conference, SCBWI, and many more, to be able to share the concepts of brand, of visual identity, which is what we're going to talk about today, about marketing plans, about how to write millennials, about marketing mindset, and many other topics. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to share this concept today. The topic that we're going to talk about is design as art. And we're going to talk about 5 principles of book cover design. First, we're going to talk about design more generally. And why is that even important? We're going to answer that question before we get into the 5 principles. When we do cover the 5 principles, we're going to end on some real life examples. I'll show you how I've brought that to life with my book, Goodbye Orchid, that you just heard about. and the ways in which I use that design to help drive awareness and conversion among readers. So first, I'm actually going to start with a story that takes place in China. So I'm going to take you back to a time in my life. I shared briefly that I worked on Dove chocolate in the US and in China. So my company had asked me back in 2010, in fact, whether I'd be interested in taking an assignment in Beijing. I moved with my husband, my twins, who were 7 at the time, to China for a 2-year assignment. And I share this story, and the way it links to design is I realized in a world where I was actually illiterate. So although I'm ancestrally Chinese, I was born and raised in New Jersey. I didn't speak Mandarin. I certainly didn't read Mandarin. So in this world that in which it was incredibly humbling to be illiterate, to not be able to speak to everyone around me, I actually found that what saved me was design. And so I start with this place of just thinking about the power of shapes, of colors to help us navigate the world. So my story when I arrived in Beijing was I was there 6 weeks before my family had arrived to start work. I was actually heading up our chocolate gifting business, and I was there to set up house. When I went to shop and realized I needed laundry detergent, dishwashing detergent, all the things to set up house, I found I could not differentiate between those things that looked so similar. It was a sea of plastic bottles with indecipherable characters on them. I had to get my driver to come into the store with me and actually interpret for me. And once he showed me, here's the laundry detergent, here's the dish detergent, I memorized design. I memorized those shapes and colors in order to navigate this world in which I was illiterate. And actually, it shows the power because there's actually a very clear tenet within design that shapes and colors are noticed first before letters and numbers. In fact, so much of our decision making as humans living very busy lives is subconscious versus conscious. Sometimes they say the percentage is only 5% of decision making is conscious, 95% is subconscious. And therefore, being able to tap into the power of shapes and colors and design to be able to break through with readers and get attention for your book and your title is a powerful tool that is what we're going to talk about today. So let's take this example of how design helped me navigate an indecipherable world in China into our book world. So in bookstores, whether they be physical or digital, as so much of book shopping is done today, you are competing against tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of titles. In that world, the power of design can help you break through and help land the meaning of your book to entice readers to pick up the title and learn more. And that's what we're going to really tap into today. I'm going to first start with a concept that if you've been to my previous talk, actually, this is the second time I'm speaking at Jen's conference. Jen had this conference in the spring as well. And at that time, I talked about author brand. And if you didn't attend, I'm actually going to share these two concepts of brand and visual identity and differentiate between the two. Because sometimes at writers' conferences, I attend marketing sessions and I hear speakers conflate the two. And I want to purposefully differentiate them because it's really powerful to think about them individually. So if you were at the spring session or if you weren't, I simply defined brand as a concept. It's a concept that encapsulates the unique positioning, differentiation, relevance, and meaning of a person, product, or service. And quite simply, you can boil that down to a promise to your reader. Or in the industry, it could be a promise to your editor, a promise to your agent. I like that thinking about brand as a concept and as a promise, differentiated from the idea of visual identity. So visual identity is defined as that brand promise translated into physical and digital assets, whether that be your logo, your typeface, your website design, your business cards, your book covers, which we're going to dive into quite a bit. And I say it's useful not to conflate the two topics, because sometimes at writers' conferences, I hear people talking about brand as if it's the same as your website or your business card, as the same as your visual look. It's important to think about them separately. And so today's content is really going to dive into visual identity, and quite specifically around book cover design, that aspect of your visual identity. So you might be asking why? Why is any of this important? Great, Carol, you've spent decades in marketing and you've worked on all these brands. How does that relate to me as a marketer, as an author? So I'll share with you a little statistic, and you might know this. You'll see on the page, there's actually just a big number 9. I'm curious what you think this number means. And I'll share with you a statistic that's actually stated in Sally Hogshead's book, How the World Sees You. This is about attention spans. So to answer the question, why is design important? Why is it important to think about brand? Why is it important to think about design? Think about the world in which we live. If what we're trying to do as authors is to have our message be out there and to reach readers, these readers are living very busy lives. In fact, Sally Hogshead in her book, How the World Sees You, says attention spans have dropped since agrarian times, when they were 20 minutes long. And now, what do you think they've dropped down to? You might see the 9 and think they've dropped down to 9 minutes long. Millennial attention spans in particular have been measured down to 9 seconds. So, unfortunately, it's probably pretty hard to get 20 minutes of somebody's attention to read your back cover copy, to read your blurbs, to start reading the first chapter to see if they're interested in your book. You might only have 9 seconds to intrigue someone with the premise of your story, with your tagline, with your hook, with your book cover. Part of why attention spans have dropped so long, there's another number on this page, which is 5,000. That number represents the number of marketing messages we are faced with a day. Not just marketing messages, but these are news headlines. These are different things trying to grab our attention every day. It can be brands, it can be promotions, it can be messages. But when we're bombarded with that many messages, this is when we need to be able to have a lot of automatic decision making. And that's why only 5% of decision making is conscious and the 95% is subconscious, because we're bombarded with so much information. To be able to navigate that world, we need to be able to weed out, to not pay attention to the noise. And so the idea of design is so that your book, the meaning behind that book, the cover, help break through instead of being part of the noise. And what I'm going to share when it comes to that design is 5 principles of great book cover design. There's a simple mnemonic to help remember these principles. It's the word SPARC, misspelled with a C at the end instead of a K. We're going to go through each 5, so don't worry, but feel free if you want to think about, jot down, or screenshot these 5. The first being simplicity. We're going to see some visual examples of that. The second being prioritization. The third is how we assess versus a brief, which we're going to talk about. The fourth is actually assessing in real life. The R is for real life or in situ. And the 5th is consistency. And that's why SPARC, simplicity, prioritization, assessment, real life, and consistency, SPARC is spelled with a C at the end. We're going to go through each one of these, and we're going to start with simplicity. Perhaps if you've been looking at book cover designs over time, you've seen this trend towards more and more simple designs. I have an example here on page of Marissa Meyer's YA series that did really well. There's 5 titles shown here: Cinder, Scarlet, Cress, Winter, and Stars Above. You can see the simplicity of design that each of these book covers simply has this quite short title, a hero image mostly in the center that has a lot of color contrast so that that hero image really stands out. In the Cinder case, it's simply a woman's foot with a high-heeled red shoe. It shows a little bit of her, the interior so of her calf. So you can actually see the bones within there. So her skin almost looks translucent or transparent. And then at the bottom is Marissa Meyer's author name. You see across the 5 titles that actually her author name is represented in the same way. We'll talk a little bit about why that's important and why it's important to have consistency of your author name represented consistently across your lines. Also, there's consistency of her, the font that's used on the titles, but the overall look that it creates is this really simple, visual, and intriguing look that draws your eye in, makes you curious, and makes you want to know more. But it's able to accomplish that with quite a bit of simplicity. We'll talk about this more when we get to brief, that we want to be single-minded about what we want to communicate on our book covers. That it's not about putting every plot point, subplot, character on the cover, but being quite choiceful about what's going to be the hook that draws the reader in. In contrast, we're going to look at some book covers that perhaps do not live up to this idea of simplicity. And because sometimes the expression, a picture's worth 1,000 words, we're going to look at more book covers. I will apologize up front if anyone in the audience loves these books or has read them, or if the author's on the line, apologies, no slight intended, but I think it is really useful to look at some examples of places where perhaps simplicity or not following principles of design is not helping the book rise to its fullest potential. And so in this first example, Love is a Wounded Soldier, there is quite a bit going on. There's the cameo photo in the center with 2 people. There's a little subtitle up top. There's the author name in dog tags down below. There's a dual-toned color to the cover. So the top half is light blue, the bottom half is brown. So there's a lot going on. It's a little hard to know where to look. And actually, because there are multiple elements, the elements end up being a little bit small. So therefore, it can be hard to read the author name, for instance. Here's another case. This one shows 9 toads or frogs, and they're all modeled black and brown, except for the middle one is red. Actually, visually, this one has some interesting appeal. It has a pattern that draws you in. You're interested in why the one is red in the middle. But because there is a lot going on the cover with the 9 different frogs, the text gets a bit lost. So the subtitle, the title, The One Who Is Not Busy, the author's name at the bottom, Darlene Cohen, are getting a bit lost in that in the busyness of that cover. This next one, and of course, I'm not talking about the quality of writing or the quality of the books, just purely looking at the book cover design. This next one by Jessica Clare, Beauty and the Billionaire. And the issue with this one, it has a dark red background, it has some crystals hanging down, and it has the title of the book at the bottom and the author's name at the top. The issue is this one actually splits your attention. So in the design world, in which I spent many years looking at designs, usually of packages, but it absolutely applies here to book covers as well. There's times where you have elements, and if they're pulling to different places instead of being quite centered and grounded, it splits your attention. And that's the case with these crystals, that your eye doesn't know where to go. There's the large teardrop crystal on the left, there's the angled crystal on the right, and you're kind of vacillating between the two and doesn't give it really a central focus for the cover. And then just one last example. This one's called The Right Man for Her by Christy Walker Boss. And there's just, this is probably the antithesis of simplicity, if this is the first principle we're talking about, in which there's a publisher's name at the top. There's the subline that the book falls within. I think it says Blush. The title of the book in the top third, the author's name at the bottom. Then there's multiple images here. There's a bird, there's a red bra, there's a beverage, there's a Post-it note with handwriting on it. They're in many different fonts as well, which is certainly taking away from the simplicity. It takes so much work to look at this cover. It's hard to figure out what's the single-minded thing that you're meant to take away. And instead of, because in those busy worlds where you only have 9 seconds of attention span, instead of focusing on, okay, let me try to figure this out, it's so tiring. Some readers, most readers probably, are just going to turn away instead. So we just don't want that to happen to your book, and that's why I talk about simplicity as being so important. So that leads us to our second principle of book cover design around prioritization, and especially prioritizing your communications brief and what's important in a brief, something called a brief. And this is the way in which we can help achieve that simplicity. So when I say brief, I simply mean a document that is used with the designer. Your publisher probably has their own version of this. Sometimes it's called an author questionnaire. It can be called different things in industry parlance. So if you're working with a designer, especially in packaged goods, it would be called a brief. And it's called a brief because it's not meant to be very long. Oftentimes it might only be 1 page long, because you want to be really simple, intentional, and really prioritize what's important when you put together your brief. Let me show you an example of one that, this is just an example. Yours might not look like this, but this is one I think is instructive to look at, because at the top you would simply share a synopsis of your story. But a few of these components I think are really important. One, to be able to articulate what's the single most important thing to communicate on this cover. Second, to be able to communicate about the audience you're trying to reach. Who is your target audience? What's your insight about that audience? And what do you want that audience to think, feel, and do when they see this cover? Third, there's this area of communications hierarchy. We're going to talk about that a little bit more with an actual cover design. And that's simply, where do you want the reader to be able to notice first, second, and third? And there probably isn't too much, in terms of fourth, fifth, sixth, because a reader's attention is only going to be 9 seconds, and you're only going to have a short period of time for them to pay attention to what's important on that cover. There also can be things on the brief like tonality and mood, and then there can be some concrete things where you could share physical characteristics of the character, the setting or the region, some visual details or symbols that are used in story, or even attach a mood board or visual references. But those would just be for the designer to know, to refer to. It doesn't mean all of that should be captured on the cover, because then that would be counter to that first principle of simplicity. Now I'm going to show an example of what happens when you have a brief versus when you don't. Because you might be thinking, well, this sounds quite academic and theoretical, and do I really need a brief? There are two reasons to need a brief. One is to communicate to the designer. Secondly, it actually is a really good checklist for yourself so that you can be really clear what's important. Just like you have to spend time to take your entire book or novel and winnow it down to a back cover blurb and a hook line, a tagline. You need to get that single-minded and be able to be that clear in your brief as well when it comes to design. So the real life example I'm going to share with you, and I have permission to share this because I'm a member of New Jersey Romance Writers, and I'm going to share this real life case study of when the chapter decided to revamp their logo.
Hey, everybody. It looks like Carol's just having a little bit of connectivity issues, so just stay with us for a second while she gets back on. In the meantime, I'm taking questions I see the comments in the chats already, just hearing all the amazing things that you are learning from Carol. But please put your questions in because we are making sure that we have all the questions for Carol to answer as she's going through and sharing with us. Would love to hear, I'm looking at all of the simplicity pieces. So this is a great exercise for us to apply SPARC as we evaluate books on the shelves. Absolutely. And if we think back to the first lines, Riley's first lines exercise, where we're evaluating the first lines in a book. Imagine combining that with also SPARC, we're evaluating the covers. So that would be awesome. So I am seeing some questions here. What advice would you give if you need to rebrand your previous titles? I see that. And then also, how would you pick a cover color? Oh, that's a good one. Awesome. So we're going to be keeping track of those questions. So just bear with us for just a couple of seconds while we try to just troubleshoot to get Carol back on. Hey, everybody. We're still getting Carol back on, but I thought it might be great for us to maybe talk through a couple of design processes. So I know that I am learning a lot from Carol. So I'm definitely not a designer. I am a writer who jealously loves designers and think they do amazing work with getting our books in place. So when I worked with my designer on Accepting Elijah's Heart, I had so many questions. So I'm going to just share with you all the design for Accepting Elijah's Heart. Just show you. Okay. So when I was working with my designer, one of the things that I was nervous about was that I wanted to make sure that it showed New York City because that is the setting, but I did not want it to show New York City in kind of the typical tourist ways where you're like, oh, this is somebody who is showing New York, but doesn't really know New York. So that was part of the question. So I actually went into deposit photos and looked for some New York City landscapes that I knew kind of as a native New Yorker, I could take a look at. And although it spoke New York, it didn't speak New York in a way that was touristy. So we wanted the setting is on the Upper East Side. So we were working on finding buildings that represent that neighborhood. There's a lot of like old architecture in that space. So working with the designer. So I gave her the couple of examples. I used deposit photos, but there are other photo stock companies that you could use. I gave her the examples that I had in mind. And then she came back with some samples from her photo stock sections. We went back and forth on talking through, okay, what are the feelings of this book? I think Carol was talking about simplicity and ensuring that your design doesn't overwhelm the reader. So I think my cover designer did a really good job of doing that. You can see the background that she blurred. Um, the she blurred the buildings. There's like just the tone of the soft blues and maybe a little purple in the sky. Um, so all of those parts in the process was what I was going back and forth with her. And as a writer, I think when you're coming in and as somebody who doesn't have design skills, one of the things that you want to make sure that you're doing is that you're listening to the people that you're hiring who are skilled at those things. So the first thing that you would want to do is just make sure that you're evaluating the designer based on their experience, because there are a lot of designers, but there is something that is very specific to cover design. That person needs to understand the genre that you're writing in. So as a cover designer, as a romance writer, I wanted somebody who actually had designed romance covers. And I also write children's stories. So for my children's book, I wanted to go to somebody who has experience writing children's book, because what you don't want to do is have your book be off genre. So when you're doing research, so the first thing that I did was I went on Amazon, I went on Barnes and Noble, I went on Apple Books, and just looked at different covers in the genre that I was writing in. And I had that information with me in order to be able to come to my designer and say, hey, this is what I see, and this is what I like, what I don't like. And then that designer came in with her expertise, saying, I know you think that this would work, but given my experience, you might want to take a look at this. So has anybody else had any experience with cover design? Would love to hear your thoughts. Oh, so I see Jen said, did you narrow down favorites and did you send them to your designer? Yes. So I had a couple of different ones. I think what worked best for me, I'm generally a person who says, here's what I don't like, and then we can work from there. So I actually sent over the ones that I was just like, this similar to what Carol was showing, the simplicity piece was a big one for me. So I sent her some samples that I said was, oh, this is too busy, and I don't want that for my cover. So we used the things that I didn't like to narrow what would work best. And she actually shared some samples with me as well to let me know. The tip about researching covers. Yep. Oh, that's a good one. And yeah, my designer had me make a Pinterest board. Absolutely. Yeah. So that you have deposit of all the images that you like and don't like. Oh, awesome. Yes. Oh my goodness. The Sunday Killer. I'm gonna try to see if I could get a picture of it here. But the Sunday Killer is so amazing. Tish, you did such a great job. Um, oh, I had it. Oh, I think I have it on my phone, so you won't be able to see it. But Tish, when Jen sent it and shared it out, I was just like, oh my God, this looks so great. Um, so Jen, when you were working with Tish, what was the process for you? How did you decide? Did you have some stuff in mind? Did you come to Tish and say, this is what I don't want? How much freedom did you give Tish to be the designer? Yeah, Ruth, it's a really cool cover. Oh, Luke. Okay, I see Tish. Awesome, Tish. Luke says Tish was great working on my cover as well. An amazing process. Awesome. Oh, Luke, I try to incorporate a theme of the book into each cover. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that, because Luke, you write nonfiction. I wonder if there's a difference between the fiction and the nonfiction. And if, because I don't know that I've necessarily seen the theme piece for fiction. So that's really curious. Jen said that she sent her favorite colors, even the back design from books on the shelf. Oh my goodness, I did not think about the back designs. That's interesting. Yeah, I was so focused on the front of it. Definitely did not think about the back. That's a good one to consider. Said images we love. Yes, she certainly hit the mark. Oh my goodness, that old wooden church. Absolutely. Yes, yes. And looking at Carol's presentation, I wonder if she was going to reach something about the focal point, and if that is an important piece. So I know for accepting Elijah's heart. Oh, there's Sunday Killer. I know for accepting Elijah's heart, um, the building that the series is set in is called the Grand Pearl. So I wanted the buildings in the background as a focal point that didn't necessarily take away from the characters. So that's why it was blurred in the back. But because it is the Grand Pearl series and it is this historic New York City landmark, we did want to make sure that it was just there in the space without overpowering it. Cooper's Landing from the book. Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Oh, look, Luke, mostly write fiction, but that was just my own ideas. Haven't done research. Gotcha. Okay. Oh, absolutely. A cover designer who knows your genre. Absolutely. Um, because not just for writers who are not designers, but especially for any writer, like you want to be able to depend on your cover designer to give you some sort of process. So they need to know, they need to have done the research that you don't have the time to do that extensive research to understand the covers that sell and those that don't. Like they need to be able to determine the 9 seconds that Carol was saying. So somebody only not has 9 seconds to make a decision about your book. What cover design would allow that to happen? Oh, Tish also read the book prior to finalizing the cover. Interesting. Yeah, Tish, was that helpful as a designer? I know that my cover designer read the blurb, and then we talked about the characters, and I think maybe she read the first paragraph, but she didn't read the entire book. That's interesting. Oh, and I wanted to show the Sunday Killer. I don't know if you guys can see my phone. So this is the Sunday Killer, out August 31st, but should be on pre-order in just a couple of more days. So I'm so excited for it. And this is the church and the church in the background that Jen was mentioning. Everything about that cover. I love the colors. It's ominous without being just like too scary, but still scary enough where it's not. It's more psychological thriller. Like I'm so excited to read this. Tish, just the cover itself is just so appealing. I would pick it up even if I didn't know that it was a book that I wanted to read. The cover tells me, oh yeah, this is interesting. You're gonna want to read that. Oh, Jen Anne is asking if you're getting the Sunday Killer in audiobook. And I have not done the work to look at audiobook covers, but I imagine that's a whole different beast. And wonder, yeah, that's interesting. Tish, as a designer, what's the process for doing audiobook covers as opposed to just paperback or ebook? Is there something different? Oh, so Jen, you're saying that you would love to do audio as well. Yep, absolutely. Oh, yes, BookRush does have the audiobook template. Yes, absolutely. And just a reminder that there is that BookRush code for WWJ conference attendees, and it's WWJ15 on any of the plans. So WWJ15 gets you 15% off any of the plans. Oh, and the cover for the audio is square instead of a rectangle. That makes sense. Oh, and it has to fit the requirements for the company. Yes, that's actually a really good reminder in terms of the requirements. So for depending if you're publishing with KDP or if you're publishing with Ingram, SPARC, or Barnes and Noble, whoever you're publishing with will have some specific requirements for the cover. I remember that we had to go back and forth with my designer because Barnes and Noble, for whatever reason, had a very different set of requirements for the cover than Kindle did. So we had to do a couple of different versions. Oh my goodness, I see that Carol is back. So we're gonna add Carol in to let her just close out.
When did you lose me? I was talking the entire time. I had no idea.
Oh no, yeah.
I had no idea.
Wow.
So what point did you get to? Which principle?
We were just on the second principle when we lost you.
Oh
my goodness.
Dear, maybe call me next time or text me.
Yeah.
Because I just gave an entire 45-minute presentation that was awesome. It was really good. I'm serious.
So much. Oh my goodness. If we can figure out how to maybe get a recording, I don't know. Yeah, we lost you on that second one. Tish, yeah, I would finish, but want to make sure because I know that we have Luke coming up. So Carol, maybe we can follow up offline just to figure out how we can get this because we know that everybody was really excited for your presentation. So we will absolutely figure out how to get you Carol's presentation because personally, I have notes to take, so I cannot wait to get it. I'm so sorry about whatever happened with the tech and the disconnect.
Yeah.
Carrot, did you want to just maybe give a little bit of a summary, just in terms of the presentation?
Sure. And so I can let the audience know about a resource. So the entire talk is about how to spark great design, and that little mnemonic stands for simplicity, prioritization, assessing versus brief, looking at designs in real life, and consistency, so SPARC with a C. That is an article I've written for DIY MFA. Do It Yourself MFA is a wonderful website with lots of resources for authors. I'm a columnist there. And actually, my latest article is on this particular topic. So feel free to just go ahead and look at the article. It has all of those points as well. I'll get you a recording, Michelle, of a previous time I've given this talk, and you can share that with your listeners. And let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to field those now.
Okay, great. So I did see a couple of questions come in while you were out. Let me just see. Oh, so we had a couple of questions that were around audiobooks versus ebooks and paperback, if it's really just kind of the same concepts, like if you would apply the same principles that you would for paperback to audiobook, or if there are anything that are very specific to that format.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the question is about the audiobook cover. And the only difference there is that the shape of the audiobook covers is square.
Got
So
it.
the design just needs to be adapted to those different proportions, but it should give the overall same feeling, so people can find the audiobook just as well as they can find the paperback or hardcover or ebook.
Okay, great. And then in terms of just the idea of simplicity, when you think about children's book versus like an adult focus, is there a difference? Because even though I see children's book, it's simple, but drawing in kids versus drawing in adults, like how do you balance the two?
I think it's really important to know what the genre norms are, and then either be choiceful about following and honoring those genre norms, or at times it can be quite successful to break the genre norm in order to be different. But you're right, you have to know your audience, and that's why in the brief it's so important to have who's your audience and what's your insight about the audience.
Okay, awesome. And then Jen was asking, what tips would you share with authors first trying to find a cover?
Yeah, and the find a cover is throwing me a little bit, because then I'm assuming that you're going out and trying to buy a pre-made cover that anyone else could use as well. I don't have experience with that. I worked with a designer at Kohler Books, and in my professional life, I tend to work with really high-end designers who are customizing covers. So,
and if you were to do that, like if somebody who's never designed a cover before and working with a designer for the first time, like how much information do they bring in versus how much do they allow the designer their creative freedom to lead them?
Yeah, and definitely you guys will need to watch the whole thing, because this is so much at the heart of what I talk about for 45 minutes. And it's being really clear in your brief to the designer, what's the single most important thing, what is the communications hierarchy, and really just to be very intentional about what's being communicated. And then assessing the design when you get it from the designer versus the brief versus against your personal taste. So the commentary back to the designer should never be, I like this or I don't like that. It actually should be, this meets the brief or this doesn't meet the brief. And then the feedback should not be about how to fix it, but about what it is you're noticing. So it might be you're getting this emotion, but not that emotion. But you're not saying, oh, move this flower a half an inch to the right. It's really the designer's work, and that's why they're trained, to be able to know how to address feedback.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. So Tish did the Sunday Killer for Jen, and she has other covers that she's made, and everybody's just been raving about her work. So she's asking questions from a designer's perspective. So, what's the best way to communicate with the author about using the principles when they prefer something different?
I mean, I bet that's a tough area, Tish, because so many authors aren't educated on this, and therefore it can be hard to work with, I would imagine. I always find, maybe in general, that it's great to set expectations up front. So the more you can contract or negotiate up front, how are you going to work? How many rounds are you allowing changes before you have to charge more? Just spelling all of that out up front, and maybe even contractually, so it's just really clear, so there aren't surprises later. I think that's when it gets difficult, is when people feel surprised later. So I hope that's helpful, Tish.
Yeah, and I think that's also helpful for writers as well. Setting expectations at the beginning just keeps confusion out of the issue.
Yeah.
So Ruth wanted to know, how would you pick a cover color?
Mm-hmm. There's a part of the presentation, actually, I'm thinking of giving you a link to a presentation I've given on this topic in the past that shows the feeling and meaning of different colors. And so, a very white cover, for instance, a lot of times will cue purity, or a very red one could either feel angry or passionate. A very black one could feel elegant or mysterious or sophisticated. So different colors do cue different meanings. But I also wouldn't, I think part of why the talk is called Design as Art is because design is not formulaic. And we shouldn't approach the design of a book cover in a formulaic way. The art is actually much more powerful in breaking through when you have such short attention spans. And so I wouldn't want to be formulaic about picking a cover color. It's really the cohesive design and how it all works together, the contrast of the elements, and also how it works in a series or in all of your titles together. So there's a Jojo Moyes example I show in the presentation in which she has different titles with different colored backgrounds, and then just a really simple, bold font on the front. There's actually no picture at all on these covers. And so it's the contrast of the title color with the background color that draws your eye. And it's actually totally fine that she's using all different colors. Sometimes she has blue, sometimes she has silver, sometimes she has red. That's absolutely fine, because as a whole, it looks like a cohesive set of books, and you get the sense of Jojo Moyes the moment you see that.
That's interesting for those of us who write series. It sounds like you're saying that if you can pick one element that goes across the different books, you don't necessarily need to keep everything the same, but that one element, if the viewer can see it, then it brings it back together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jen wanted to know, what advice would you give if you need to rebrand your previous titles?
I do see a lot of authors going back to their backlist. If they find a look that works for them, then they go back to their backlist and, kind of redo all those covers, and that could be worthwhile. One of the concepts I talk about is, because people see shapes and colors before they read letters and numbers, it's really important to have consistency of your author name represented the same across all of your titles, and especially even the location on the cover will help people so that they start to recognize your author name as just a shape, and then they're able to find you in that way, as opposed to making them like really read your name every single time. So as opposed to, sometimes I see the mistake of people matching the way their author name is represented to the way their title is represented on that particular cover. Instead, it should be the same. The author name should be the same in every book. So if you have a series or you have a bunch of single titles, that's going to make your name more recognizable.
And is that a matter of the font and the font size, or like okay, great.
Hey,
So
Anne.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love that question, and I love your cover as well. A Tale of Ashes. It's just a really stunning, so powerful cover. So the cover of Goodbye Orchid, which I do show in the presentation that we all just missed, except for me, I guess I was giving a presentation to one. The way I briefed the designer was I said we wanted to capture, the single most important thing was to capture the physical and emotional shattering of the main characters of Phoenix and
Wow.
Orchid.
Okay.
And that's why she took the image of orchids that's on the front of the book and she shattered them. And so the symbolism is really to capture what's happening in their relationship.
Yeah.
And also in the inside of the book, the bottom right corner of every page has an image of orchids. When you flip through the pages, the orchids will appear to shatter until you get to the darkest point of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then the orchids will appear to come back together until you get to the emotionally satisfying ending. And so the book has won these dozen awards it's won has been for the book cover design, also the interior design, and then lots of other things. Yeah.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry we missed so much that you shared, because the tips just in answering the questions along, people in the chat have just been blowing it up saying how helpful they are. So Carol, thank you so much again for making the time. We will definitely get all of the resources that Carol's sharing, getting those recordings out. And we definitely have to figure out how to do another kind of Q&A, because I know there'll be other questions coming in just for you. So awesome. Thank you again.
Sounds great.
For all of
No
the
problem. It's
All
okay.
right.
See you in the rest of the conference. Take
All
care.
right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right, all. Luke will be coming on soon, so in just 2 minutes. So we appreciate you standing with us as we dealt with this tech hiccup. So let's get excited to hear Luke's story. It is a powerful one. If you haven't heard it yet, and even if you have, I definitely recommend staying for this session. So we'll see you soon. Bye.